Tom, I kind of had a related question of sorts in terms of keeping the balance and keeping our ego in check. Would you say that maybe trying to maintain not a constant state, but continually having some sort of honest introspection as to, I don't know, stopping in the day and saying, okay, why am I feeling this right now, or why am I doing this, and then tracing it back to maybe the root of where it all started. Is that a good approach, would you say, to kind of learning or why we're making the choices that we're making, I
Yes,
guess?
absolutely. That's like going through life with eyes open as opposed to going through life with eyes closed. Yes, that's a very good choice, a very good thing to do. And if you do it honestly with yourself and be very wary of answering that question with ego, because the ego tends to justify whatever you think.
Right, right.
You do whatever you do, and then the ego tells you why that was a good idea and the best thing and the only thing you could have done anyway. That's what our ego is good at. So you have to really be honest. Why do I feel this way? Oh, I feel this way because that jerk just, that's why I feel this way. It's perfectly reasonable. I should feel this way. And we justify it. And that's not the right answer. You feel this way and you look at it because, I am inconvenienced. The person did something that wasn't nice. And well, so why does that bother you? Isn't that person's issue, not yours? Why do you make it your issue?
Right, right.
This sort of thing. If you really think of it in ways that are outside of your ego, which means you need to be open-minded about your reasons why, then yes, it's a very effective way to grow.
So once, maybe after doing that for a while, maybe we realize a certain pattern
Sure.
that we're reacting to. I mean, I've noticed that with myself. I've come to realize I'm doing certain things, but it's easy to recognize it, but it seems almost impossible to kind of make myself stop that pattern. Is there an approach to that?
Yeah, just keep at it.
Keep at it.
That's the only approach. One of the other things that's very telling is just watch your language. Listen to what you say. And sometimes it's hard to do, but
Right.
even if you can record it, but if you listen to your language and kind of count how many times a minute you say the word I and me, that's a good indication of how much
Mm.
your reality centers around you.
Right. Right.
And that's a good tool, just the I me count. And when you're around other people, listen to them. Listen to what they say and just in the conversation and see the density of the I me mine my and it'll tell you a whole lot about who they are and where they're coming from, just listening to the language.
Right. Right.
So you can do those things. When you catch yourself doing it, then it's like, uh-oh, was that five my's, in just one sentence?
Set the alarm off.
Yeah, it sets the alarm off and you say, maybe I need to rethink this. Is there something that's a little bigger here other than my needs? And that will help as well. But there is no secret to it. These things, I've had any number of people tell me that, they don't have any beliefs and, they don't have any fears and they beat the ego thing a long time ago.
Right.
And, it's just that they don't see it anymore. They've
Sure.
gotten to a point where their beliefs, fears, and ego are all accepted as the way things should be. And at that point, it all becomes invisible. So how do you make the invisible visible? That's tough. You just have to keep working at it. There's no easy thing to do. But if you really want to see it, and your intent is really true that you want to see it rather than you just want to convince yourself that you're such a wonderful person, then you will see it. It'll get popped out of you, and the larger system will help you. It'll pop things into your mind and kind of stick your face in it a little bit occasionally so that you get it. So that
Right.
will, the system's out there to help you, and it generally will if you're open to it.
Right.
But if you're not, it won't.
And essentially being open just is accepting the fact that there's always a future path I need to grow towards or on, I guess.
Yes, and try to stay aware of it. So at that point, then you're going through life with your eyes open. You're looking for ways to improve. That is worth almost everything. Just see, it's a matter of intent. If your intent is to grow, you will move and do and think in ways that help you grow. If your intent is to make sure that you always get yours, then those things will never occur to you.
Right.
So it's just your intent. your intent is what kind of moves things the way you want them to go.
Okay, excellent. Let's see. Maybe we'll go to Linda. She had a question, and we haven't heard from her for a while. Linda, did you want to ask? I just have one question that you had sent me, uh, other than the other Linda's question. So, did you want to ask the question that you had sent?
No, I want to ask the other Linda's question because I think it's going to be quick.
Sure, sure.
Linda
Maybe
and
we'll do them
I,
both.
what?
Maybe we'll do them both.
Yeah, maybe we'll have time because I do think this one will be quick. Let me get it up. The Hang on just one second. Sorry. This is the question, and we think we know the answer. Does our IUOC, our individuated unit of consciousness, have a name or some kind of designation, something we are always known as, regardless of the names we get as free will awareness units in PMR? And that we think the answer is yes, but it isn't a name per se. What I think you're going to say, Tom, is it's more of like an energy signature or fingerprint.
Yeah, it's your essence. It's who you are. So as far as do we get a name, I'd say no, you don't get a name. You don't get a tag or a label that identifies you. You know, that's what I would call a name. But no
Mm-hmm.
names are necessary. Names are necessary only at the intellectual level. See, at the intellectual level, if I'm talking about you to someone else and I say, oh, did you know that Linda, da, 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 well, I need the name so that the other person I'm talking to knows whom I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
See, so we need that for our intellectual exchange of linear information. But if you're not operating at the intellectual level, if you're operating at the being level, then it doesn't matter. It's not about Linda anymore. It's about ideas. It's about concepts. It's about information that will help you or hurt you in your evolution. You know, it's about things that matter. It's not about wonder what Linda's doing today. You know, that's sort of a soap opera kind of an attitude, which is mostly intellectual and mostly ego related. If you get rid of the ego and you get rid of the intellect, then a name is just not important. It's the information, and what does that information contain, and what can you learn from it? That's what's important. It doesn't really matter who said it or why it was said. It's just you get data, and what does this data mean? What can I do with it? How can I interact with this situation? How can I interact with this being? Here's a being and they're sad. How can I interact with them? It doesn't matter that their name's Fred. You see, at the being level and outside of ego, names are superfluous. That's why most non-physical beings of much quality that you run into don't really have names, and we give them names because it helps us focus on them as entities. But often you ask an entity a name and they kind of, nothing comes back. It's not that they're trying to hold out on you that their name is secret. It's just that they're not used to dealing in names. And eventually, if you prod them enough, they'll make something up, but they generally just make it up on the spot. And it has nothing to do with anything other than you need a symbol in order to put in your symbol box so that you can pull it back out again, because that's the way you, live in this reality. So they will, help you out there and make up a symbol and give it to them. And then it's like, well, you can call me Fred if you want. That's just the way we work. So we often ask for names and eventually we can get them if we keep asking. But entities of high quality generally don't function by names because names are superfluous. They have only to do with intellect and ego.
I got that. I understand. But getting back to the essence, because we've all got our essence. Would you, in NPMR, be able to recognize an entity or a being by its essence and they
Absolutely.
us? Okay.
Absolutely. Perfectly clear. No, I wouldn't call that a name. It's just a knowing. And you
Okay.
don't recognize them by anything they do or say. It's just, in other words, that data just comes across as who they are, but it's not a label. It's just, essence is probably a good word. It's very hard to explain because it doesn't have an analog here in this physical reality, because we're reduced to, communication by bits.
Mm.
And there you get whole chunks, and that whole chunk delivers a knowing of exactly, who you're dealing with. So yeah, it is. You do have an essence, and you are known by that essence.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, Tom. William had a question related to intent, which we were talking about just a minute ago. William, did you want to go ahead with that one?
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure how relevant it is, but I will ask it anyway. Do you have any tips on the best way of intending so that it's in the best format for the larger consciousness system, if that makes sense?
Well, yeah, it's mostly the best process, and the best state to be in is one where your intent is very clear, well focused, and has a lot of I don't know what we say. Has a lot of power behind it, has a lot of energy behind it. We use these metaphors, but none of them are exact. But you kind of get the idea, and the way you do that is to clear out all the noise. If it's not about you, if you've gotten rid of all the chatter, your intellect has been turned off, and you are just a being. And now a being can think. It doesn't mean that you can't think. You have to be blank because your intellect's turned on. That's not true. Your intellect that I'm talking about that needs to be turned off is your analysis, your judging, your weighing and considering. Mostly it has to do with judging what you should do. What was this? How did that work? Should I do it the other? All the second guessing, all that junk is a problem. That's just your ego spinning its wheels. You get rid of all of that, and you can have an intellect that basically is a guide. It just is telling you what's there and how it interprets the information, and focuses on your intent and getting your intent as precise as possible. And you do that with words, and you say, well, I'm using my mind, my intellect, but that's different. You're using that as a way of expressing yourself, not as a way of controlling yourself and evaluating yourself. It's not self-focused, I guess is the way to say it. It's not self-focused. So there's a different way. There's sometimes people get the wrong idea when I say you get rid of the intellect, and they're saying, well, if I get rid of the intellect, there's nothing left. I'm in a fog. I'm comatose without an intellect. But that's not it. I don't mean you get rid of the intellect, you have to be comatose. You get rid of the intellect, and you're no longer self-focused. You're now just aware. And you're aware of your awareness, but that awareness is not analyzing, projecting, scheming, or busy with details. It's just existence, and it can focus, and you can use language to focus it. I want all the black stuff to become white. You're healing, and you make that very clear. Or if you're not very focused, you can say, well, there's probably some stuff in there that isn't good, and if there is, I'd like to get rid of it. That's very unfocused. You say there's a difference. So you can use your language to be very clear, because when your language is clear, it means your mind, your thought's clear. Your thought is an expression. Your language, which you say and think, is an expression of your mind, of your consciousness. So if use that language and those thoughts to be very precise, very clear, exactly, if you have to know exactly what it is you're doing and why you're doing it and what the point is and what you want to happen, and at the same time, you're floating in the void. There's nothing there. There's no distractions. There's nothing else in reality except you and your mind. And that then is a good place to be, when your intent will become very strong and more powerful. Another thing I've found that people talk about getting in this pulsation state when they meditate, where their body seems to feel like it's oscillating, like your body is rubber, and it's not really your body. It's just your perception of your physical being, and it's not your physical being so much at all, but your perception in it, and you're oscillating like that. When you get in a good pulsation state, that generally means that you're in a place where you're no longer operating in the physical reality frame, or your operation in the physical reality frame is very weak compared to the way it usually is. That's a good symbol. That's a good signal or signpost, if you like, that things you do then with your intent will be more powerful, because you are less connected to physical reality frame. You're freer. You're more just consciousness.
Hmm. So
So that's a good
then,
thing. Yeah, get in that pulsation state, and that's a good time.
mm,
Just get to where you can hold that, where that pulsation state just sits there and you feel it and you're very comfortable with it and it's just doing it, and make that a steady state. And then you take your mind and start focusing your intent on something, and you'll find you'll do better than other times.
so this pulsation state, I mean, I'm not sure if that's what I've had a few times where you feel like I mean, you got some parts of your body that seem to oscillate a little bit. Like, I mean,
Hmm.
it's very subtle, but you feel like basically you're breathing and it's out of sync with your breathing. It's like it's moving when you're breathing, it's not. And is that what you're referring to? Is it more
Yeah,
of an
that's probably it.
overall?
Well, it's different. Everybody experiences it differently, but basically it's experienced as motion. You have a sense of movement, of wobbling, pulsating.
Like a grass a bit in the wind, right?
Yeah, something like that. And you just get this sense. And what that is, I believe, is that you're beginning to let go of your physical, um, your physical senses, and you're no longer feeling, touching, smelling, hearing, seeing things. Those senses kind of shut down. And when those senses shut down, it's like a servo system that doesn't have any input. It tends to wander.
Okay.
If you have a servo system and you don't give it any input, it doesn't know what to do. So it tends to wobble. It tends to go here, well, and then it goes here. And it just kind of wobbles
It's a
around
good
its
analogy.
null point. Yeah, it wobbles around its null point. It doesn't stay still. And I believe when your mind then is no longer connected to the physical, you're not feeling, seeing, hearing, any of that sort of stuff. You this this sense of motion is really a kind of, it's almost like maybe a sensory deprivation thing. You don't have any input. You tend to wander. You tend to wander around, and it's not real in a sense, but it
It's more
does.
your
It's
perception of
just
it, right?
yeah. It's like a signpost that says, "Okay, I'm feeling this now. I must not be so attached to the physical.
I get it.
This may be a good time to heal Aunt Susie." So it's that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you for the answers.
Okay, Tom. Uni had a question that relates to intent, but specifically his question related to intent towards negative, non-physical matter reality entities. Uni, did you want to go ahead and ask that one?
Yeah. The question actually, I got the question when after I woke from a dream, where I had an encounter with a negative being, but it was just a dream, and yeah, it was a lucid dream, and it seems that I was constrained by a larger reality system soon. Certain, yeah, like an energy beam and such. It was just a battle of will or intent. But yeah, that got me thinking about how one would most efficiently or effectively use intent when fighting negative entities, because most most of these encounters take place in dreams and are mostly fear-based. And in these dreams, we can use shields and hand-to-hand combat and such. But I'm wondering what, how one should, um, how one could, if one could effectively deal with such encounters in a more real encounter, in a in a non-ordinary dream. Yeah.
Okay. The way that you interact, the way you deal with it, with your encounter, is a tool. Okay, and tools are personal. It's just like when we heal and we say all the evil or all the bad cells are white, and then we see the dark spots and we can diagnose where they are, and then we can light on them to get rid of them. All of that is tools, and it's tools to help focus our mind. Now, with dealing with negative entities, it's the same thing. you can deal with them, like you say. You can do, kind of a martial arts thing. You can use energy beams. You can do all sorts of stuff. But all the things you do are basically tools. Just like using the white light to heal is a tool. So then you have to think of, well, what is it that I can do, like the white light? What is it that I do in this situation that will help me focus my intent on getting rid of, destroying, being safe from, whatever it is your intent is. And there's a lot of different intents you can have. If your intent is to destroy, then you realize that's a violent intent and needs to have good reason. Otherwise, you become part of the problem rather than part of the solution. So you have to understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and then find a doing thing, a process that helps you focus your intent on achieving the result. So if your intent is just to make it leave you alone, say, rather than destroying it, then what can you do to focus your intent on that happening, on that being the future outcome of what happens next? It leaves you alone. Well, you can focus that intent by, maybe talking to it and convincing it, like in the Star Wars thing, we are not the ones you're looking for, go look over behind that rock. And as they go over there, you can just disappear, or you can build a wall between yourself and them, or you can use a shield, or you can just disappear, or you can do all kinds of things. But it needs to be something that for you helps you focus and hold an intent on the result of what you want to achieve. That's the same way the healing with light does. So it's a similar kind of thing. Now it's different for different people. So everybody needs to generate their own tools. That's why when you say, well, what should I do? How do I deal with a negative entity? Well, I can tell you, possible things you could do, but if you try to do the same things I do, or the same things that somebody else would tell you, well, here's what you do. First you grab them by the throat, and then you do this, and then you do that. Well, that's their thing. And for them, that helps them focus their intent, and it works very well, perhaps. But that doesn't mean that is a process that is effective against the dark side. It just means that is a process that's effective for that individual to focus their intent on making the outcome turn out the way they want it, the way they'd like it, raising the probability that the future gives them the state they like. So this is what you need to do. You need to generate your own. I know people feel more comfortable if you just tell them, what to do. Well, look, here's what you do. First you visualize this lightsaber. And we do a little Star Wars action. And the first thing you do is you slice them up into little pieces, and then you take all the little pieces and surround them with white light, and that way it neutralizes them. And then you take that and put so much white light on them that they all turn white, and then you've just neutralized the being. Or you take their energy and you put it in a bottle and you throw it in the sun. There's all kinds of things you can do, but none of those things are really anything more than tools, and they're individual tools. So create your own. Now, if you're frightened, then there's absolutely nothing you can do, because if you're frightened, you see, your fear makes it such that none of your tools will work because you're afraid they won't work. So that doesn't help you at all. So you say, well, gee, I don't know what to do. This big thing has long teeth, and I'm just a little weenie person out here, and it's going to get me, and you're afraid. Then whatever you do doesn't seem to work, because it doesn't really help you focus. Your intent is really focused on the fear. Your intent is focused on a horrible thing that's going to happen next, and a horrible thing that happens next. So first of all, you have to be fearless. You have to have no fear. And that's a very hard thing for a lot of people. So if you have no fear, then what you have to do is always have that calm state that you're in. You have to be in that, since you have no fear, there's no reason why you can't be in that void space where, there's no intellect and there's no ego going on. There's no fear. Then you should have that, and then you can focus your intent on things that help you. But you can't do that if you're sitting there with fear, because the fear focuses your intent on what it's afraid of. Fear is a very strong focuser of intent. So that's why mostly things that you fear come true, because as you fear them, your intent gets focused very strongly on them and it creates them. So that's the thing about dealing with the negative. Be fearless, be calm, make sure what you're doing is right for the right reasons. You're not just trying to destroy something because you can, or because you're wondering, because you're frightened or something. Those are all the wrong reasons. And create your own tools in this calm space where you are consciousness alone, and then use your tools effectively. If they don't work, get new tools. If they don't work, it's probably because it's a bad tool for you, and your intent is not being focused by them. Something else is focusing your intent. Well, like your fear or some other such thing. Well, if I get out my lightsaber, they'll get out a bigger lightsaber, so that won't work. Well, then if that's the way you feel about it because you're afraid that that's what's going to happen, then that's probably what'll happen.
So
does that make sense to you, Uni?
yeah, it does. So if one were fearless, one could use the point consciousness state while engaged in such a battle.
Yes, you should live in that. You should live in that state when you are not actively focused in the physical reality state. You should basically live in that state of pure consciousness. Eventually, that should become kind of your normal state of existence in the larger reality frame, because that is an effective state where you can be effective. If you take fear there, then you're taking all sorts of baggage. With fear comes all the other stuff. Fear's the key. From fear, you get ego. From fear, you get expectations. From fear, you get beliefs. From fear, you get needs and wants and desires and all the rest of that stuff. So with the fear comes all that garbage, and with that baggage that you carry with you, it's very difficult for you to do anything, because your intent is pulled and drawn in all sorts of ways, and you become very ineffective.
Okay. That helps. No understanding. Thanks.
Vicky had asked a question while you were responding to Uni. Vicky, did you want to go ahead and ask Tom that question now?
Yeah, thanks. It's just sort of like the mentioning of the negative entities and that sort of thing. It brought to mind something that I read, I think it was in one of Bob Munro's books, about in the, I guess when you dream, you pretty much like you're safe, but except for a couple of circumstances that he could think of, it could never harm you. And I've heard other people say there's no way that it can harm you because it's just like a separate dimension. So I was just wondering, like, what is the reality of, if you're dreaming something which presumably is something that's happening in another dimension, although I suppose it could be sort of just within your mind, I don't really know. Is there any potential for it to physically harm your PMR body, for instance?
Well, yes, there is a potential, and it's not, though, the way you think, probably. I guess that's presumptuous of me to think that I know the way you think. But in any case, it's not the way one would think, like the monster comes and it bites and can it hurt me? Is there something that can be done to me out there that then causes me physical problems? It's not that so much. I mean, it is that in a way. There are things and altercations you can have, and they can affect you, but it's not because the thing bites and it hurts. It's because you attach some of what it's doing, its energy and its intent gets attached to you. If you have fear, and here's another derivative of fear that gives a lot of people trouble. If you have guilt, let's say you go out and you involve with something and you feel like you're not doing it right, or you're inadequate, or you shouldn't have done that, or you're involved in something because you were out trying to do something that you feel actually wasn't a good thing to do. Well, that then is a connection with that negative thing. You give that negative thing a pathway into your own system because you feel guilty, or you feel frightened, or you feel inadequate. All those things, those are all ego fear things. If you have that ego fear thing, then whatever happens out there can attach to you. And I don't mean it attaches to you and you're the innocent victim. I mean, you're part of the process. you attach to it, you connect with that, and then you feel like, you didn't do it right. You got overwhelmed. You may be fearful that you're going to be fearful, that sort of thing. It can get very twisted. But if you have that connection to it, then it can hurt you, in the sense that what your intent is, changes the reality that you experience. So now you feel, okay, this thing, you're afraid of this thing, and it bit you in the shoulder, and then you wake up the next day and your shoulder hurts, and then that worries you, because this thing bit you in the shoulder, and now your shoulder hurts. And what if it gets worse? And then it gets worse. And what if it gets so bad that I can't work? And then it gets so bad that you can't work. You see, you're doing this. You're accepting that energy. Okay, it was a negative thing. Now, that negative thing probably is a representation of your fear anyway. Not necessarily, but it might be you may be meeting your own fears. When you get into these spaces, often what you run into are your own fears, your own sense of what's wrong, and what kind of what's evil in the world, and you run into that, and it's you. That's your sense of what's out there. So some of it is self-created, but sometimes you run into the very nasty things that are just separate things that are out there. It's part of, there's all kinds of things out there. So you run into that, you have some kind of interaction with it, and if you have fear and ego and stuff involved in it, it can hurt you, because you bring that back. And you can multiply that fear. It's the same way that voodoo people get their hurt their victims. They almost always first have to advertise that they're going to do something. Oh, I'm going to put a spell on you. I'm going to get the local voodoo witch to make you barren, or kill you, or do something. And it's the fear that works the magic. Okay, now I'm being a little simplistic here because it'll be more understandable, but that's basically the way it works. Now, if you go and you have no fear whatsoever, and you deal directly from this fearless non-ego, it's it may be hard to say a loving thing because you're having an altercation, but it's from kind of a love position. No fear, and you're not trying to hurt anything. You're just doing what you need to do, defending yourself, defending another person who isn't able to defend themselves, and you feel right and justified, and you know that it's not just ego that justifies it, that this is good. And that gives you a lot of power, and it gives you a lot of immunity, because then you don't take any of it on. You don't bring any of it back with you. It's just whatever happened. Use your tools. And if you approach it that way, then I would say it's pretty close that nothing's going to happen to you out there. Again, there's things now going on in the margins that I'm not talking about. We're talking about just general things, and you're pretty invulnerable if you come from it from that space. Now that's the big point. That's the 99% of the time. There can be things that can affect you there that just affect you, and it doesn't really matter what you do and where you're coming from. And those things you just need to deal with. But for the most part, you can't, I don't know. For the most part, you can deal with them more effectively if you don't give them any inroads into your energy system. And the only inroads that you can give them is fear. So if you deal with some kind of thing like that and you let it go, you do the best you can, and you don't let fear invade you, you'll do just fine with it. It won't hurt you. You can recover. Whatever hit you took won't be that serious. You'll be able to recover from it and get over it very quickly because your intent is right and you're fearless. So mostly the people who say nothing can hurt you, they're basically correct. That's true 99.99% of the time, if you are fearless and if you are right in what you do. If you're not right in what you do, if you do things for ego or you do things to bully, you'll know inside that that's wrong. And when you know it's wrong, you have a you have a connection to it that allows that negative energy to invade you. It invades you with your sense of the wrongness of it. So, or with your sense of the fear of it. So whether you're invulnerable or not isn't so much having the right charms or anything as it is having the right attitude.
It's not an absolute, yeah.
No.
Related to that, while you were talking, I remember in one of Bob Monroe's books as well, he was looking for evidence of the reality, I guess, of, you know, dreams, etc. And, you know, in an out-of-body, I guess, experiment, he visited a friend of his, and I think he pinched them, something like that, pinched them really hard so that it would there would be a physical reaction in their physical body. And when, you know, he was speaking to them in the physical later, they didn't remember it, but they did know that they'd had it like it felt like somebody, like there was a bruise or something on them, and they didn't know how it had happened in the spot where he had physically, or he had pinched them, you know, in an out-of-body experience. So I'm just wondering about the mechanism of that, maybe.
Okay, the mechanism of hurt the same as the mechanism of heal. You know, if you can use your mind to change the probability that somebody's illness is going to get better or worse, you can do it for worse or for better, either one. So that's the idea of using mental energy to modify probability. Now, again, we get back to like the voodoo thing. That's what they do, okay? But they using fear with that makes it a much more potent process, okay? But you can use your mind to affect things. And if you use your mind to give somebody a headache, then you can give them a headache as well as take their headache away. And what you're doing then is interacting with that person, modifying the probability of their reality being a certain way, and they are accepting it. They are taking that reality. So in a sense, they're cooperating with you. They're letting them do that. And usually you're limited that way. If the person resists, they usually will be successful, and they have to do that with no fear. The more fear they have, the less they can resist, the more they give you entree. You can set up an intent that says, you know, nobody can reach my energy. And if that's a strong intent, and you can kind of slough that stuff off very easily. You can use tools like, all right, here's this tool I surround myself with, and anybody sends me anything negative, it bounces off this cocoon I have around myself and goes right back to them. So as much as they send, it comes back and hits them right between the eyes. You know, it gets them, and that will teach them, you know, to leave me alone, because whatever they try to give me, they get back. Or it's a big absorber. Whatever they send, it just absorbs it and runs it to ground, right? That sort of thing, and it never bothers me. These are intents that basically make you uncooperative with the energy that someone else would like to send you. You don't have to accept it. Most people who have very little understanding kind of accept what's given to them. You know, they watch whatever programs on TV, right? They're not real discriminating. And yes, you can affect people like that, but again, the person is kind of opening themselves up to that effect because they are not focused, they're not fearless, they have you know, and they accept whatever's handed their way. So you do have some control over it. It's not just like anybody can come and give you a headache anytime, or give you the measles, or give you cancer or something. People can modify the probability to that direction, but you can modify the probability away from that direction. And you can do that just by refusing to accept that kind of a thing. You don't have to constantly run around trying to defend yourself. You can just make yourself invulnerable. And when you do that, you basically don't accept energy into your system unless, you know, it's like on the internet where you have these programs and you don't accept somebody changing something in your operating system unless you agree to it. You know, it's that same kind of a thing. So yes, you can use this for doing wrong. You can use it to hurt people. Typically, people who get powerful enough in it to be effective are also well enough evolved to not use it wrongly. That's kind of why it takes a while to work up on this. You wouldn't want to be able to read a book, get a magic word, and then be able to turn around and, force people to do things you wanted. That would be a very bad kind of a reality to be in. It's much better in the reality we have is that you don't have much success or much power or much effectiveness because you have all this ego. Once you have a lot of love, then you get a lot more effectiveness and a lot more power. So it kind of goes together. It's kind of self-regulating in that way. But there are those who can train the focus of their mind and still be negative. They kind of lower their entropy through control, power, and force rather than through love. And those kind of do exist. And if you get in an altercation with one, then you need to be fearless and unaccepting of what they deliver. And basically that should protect you. But it does get down to force against force, and whoever has the more power in their intent will be the one who wins the force contest.
Thank you. That sort of helps me understand that a lot. Thank you.
I hope it didn't scare you any. I try to say these things.
It actually kind of, I can feel the strength within that I need to kind of to meet it with, and that's good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to scare people, so I'm awfully worried to say too much about the negative side because I don't want to frighten people. On the other hand, I do want to tell them the whole truth. So I have a little mixed feelings sometimes when we talk about negative things, not to leave people with, oh my God, this thing can hurt me and I have to be, I'm not fearless. I'm scared to death of it, So now what do? How do I defend myself from the evil wizard? And basically, if you don't travel in those circles, if you're just home watching TV and you're fearful and you don't go there, then you never really run into the evil wizard. And there's no real reason that the evil wizard should come knock on your door. So you're generally safe. So if you dare to tread in those circles and you dare to get involved in all that stuff, then you should be prepared. You should be fearless. You should develop your skills and your tools and use them.
Tom, one thing that, and it's really more of a comment that maybe you can provide some insight for me on, but one thing I've noticed with myself is that while I'm here in PMR, my level of fear seems to be more maybe exaggerated or more, I'm not sure how to say it exactly, but if I wake up in a lucid dream, or if I'm in a lucid dream and transition to what I know to be an out-of-body experience, or once I'm in an out-of-body experience, there doesn't really seem to be the level of fear that I know or that's familiar to me within PMR. So it's almost like I let loose some of my limits in some ways, or I feel more powerful. Is that something that's maybe specific to me, or is that kind of a common thing for most people that go into a different state outside of PMR?
It's common in the sense that I've known, a fair number of people who do feel that way, but it's not common in the sense that everybody does it. Some people are just the opposite. They feel pretty strong here and confident in this reality. They get into another reality and they're very fearful. So Sometimes it works the other way around. It depends on it's an individual thing. And typically you get one, if you're balanced, you do neither. If you are kind of consistent all the way through. But what's going on there, and the reason you feel that way, is that you leave when you are in that state, you're kind of detached from the physical reality. Right. And when you're detached from the physical reality, you leave those fears with the physical reality because they're physical fears. There's fears of things happening, and you're no longer attached to that, so you kind of no longer think about it. You leave it there. And Bob used to have a thing in his I think he put it in his gateway and other things where he'd have people make a big chest in their minds. They'd create this big strong box, and they'd put all their fears and their problems and their issues and all the things that are nagging them in this box, and then they'd lock the box. And then they were allowed to go on without them. You see, they could leave all that stuff behind. And this was very effective for people, but it's just obviously that's the tool. That's a way of focusing your mind on letting go of that stuff and not operating on it. Right. And that's what you do in a good meditation state. You're not operating any longer on anything physical. You're just in the void that's entirely non-operative in the physical world. So yeah, that's why you're leaving all that stuff behind. And it seems probably to you that that's just an obvious thing to do because you're some other reality frame. Why do you need that junk for?
Right.
So you just leave it there. Other people do the opposite. Oh, I'm not in the physical. I'm not in the safe thing I'm used to. I'm out in some wild, reality frame that anything could happen. And, what if there's big animals here that are hungry, and they don't know. So it's the unknown that unnerves them and causes them fear. Fear of the unknown is a big issue with a lot of people. You're in the unknown and it's like, well, let's explore. I'm in the unknown. Let's see what I can do with it. It's just a different attitude.
Right, sure. Okay. Well, it looks like we've got about 5 more minutes. Should we go ahead and maybe start wrapping it up?
If we talk about what we were trying to do here, we're trying to get a bunch of people who already had been involved and kind of immersed in this material enough to produce questions that were a little more well thought out and well planned and a little deeper than what you normally get on a spur of the moment interview by people generally who have never read the book. And even worse, you get calls in by people who have not even never read the book, but haven't even listened to the whole program. They just get a flick of something goes by and they got to say something. And I think it's done well. I think the questions have been well focused, and I think we've covered some interesting territory. So definitely. I don't know. My sense of it is that it's been it was an experiment and it's been a pretty good success.
I had actually a last question for you, which is related to some work you mentioned you were doing a while ago. That you were working on a book, I think, on the topic of what's happening today in our world. I mean, that got my interest a while ago. Yeah, are you still working on that, or?
I haven't done much with that. That was a concept, and I got a little bit down that path, but I got overcome by events with that. And then my concept for it was that to look at what's happening and what's going on in the world from the perspective of the big picture, not just from an analysis from the little picture. You got tons of analysis from the little picture. Everybody and their brother who has an opinion, will have an analysis of what's going on in the world, but rather as seen from the big picture, what's happening here and why is it happening, and kind of what's the point and what do we do about it? So that was the thought, and I kind of got going on that way, but don't hold your breath waiting for that book. I've got a couple other ideas that are in front of that, and I don't know if I'll ever get there.
I will trade it for a little forum post somewhere when you get some time. Yeah, thanks a lot.
It's been fun.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for the opportunity.
My pleasure, folks.
Just got a couple of 100,000 questions more for the next.
Well, that won't take us more than 30 or 40 years to work off. Might as well get started. Huh?
That's right.
Yeah, I think everybody feels that way. Matter of fact, I've noticed when I've had these question and answer sessions, after about 3 or 4 hours of it, it starts to get slower and slower, and you can tell the questions are getting more of, oh, this is what I just thought of now, And,
yeah.
But an hour later, after it's all over and everybody's gone home, suddenly there's hundreds of questions. All sorts of things pop up, like mushrooms after a rain. It's hard to process all this information as you get it. Real-time processing of things that are this difficult to really grasp is hard to do, and you get more of it. You'll get more of it in the weeks that follow, which is why you shouldn't or really couldn't do this every other day. It would just be too much. You would never swallow it before the next bite came.
Right.
So we'll do it in whichever way seems most effective, but it does take some time to settle. Those other 10,000 or 100,000 questions. All right. Well, good night, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
Good night, Tom.
Thank you, Tom, for your time.
Bye, guys.
Yeah,
Good night.
you're welcome.
Good night.